I cannot vote for a bill where I have doubts about whether they will be protected. We can come back, we can have a commission, we can craft a better bill, but I will not be voting for this bill this morning.
Starmer is being attacked from all sides. There is a civil war brewing inside the Labour Party, and Diane Abbott is at the centre of it. From openly opposing Starmer's policies to exposing him on live TV, the tensions between Diane and Starmer are reaching the tipping point. Even before the elections, Starmer did everything he could to get rid of her, and now she's not afraid to stand up against him. Diane is putting Starmer's government to shame, and that raises the question, is she plotting against Keir Starmer?
That in 1969, Parliament voted to abolish the death penalty for murder. Public opinion was actually against this, but MPs believed on a point of principle that the state should not be involved in taking a life. It was a good principle in 1969, and it remains a good principle today.
Starmer seems to hate Diane because she stands for actual Labour principles and doesn't cowardly flip-flop around every issue. The British government has always encouraged life over death, and that is why we abolished the death penalty. What kind of message does it send when we're more concerned about how to let people die than helping to save them? Diane delivers a powerful speech against Starmer's government, and it shows that this bill has some serious issues.
But I have many reservations about this bill, and in particular, I do not believe that the safeguards are sufficient. They are supposed to be the strongest in the world because of the involvement of a High Court judge. But the divisional courts have said the intervention of a court would simply interpose an expensive and time-consuming forensic procedure.
Labour has been flaunting this bill around, claiming that they have the best safeguards in place to protect people from being forced into it. However, as everything Labour does, there are countless loopholes, and some of their measures are just plain ineffective, nonsensical, and useless. Think about it. How do we know that the patients are not being forced or emotionally manipulated? Even the facts are on Diane's side, as the courts have confirmed that she's absolutely right. Starmer and his Labour gang thought involving a High Court judge would somehow solve all the problems, but that's just wishful thinking. In fact, you wouldn't believe how many ministers still oppose it.
Only those who believe implicitly in judicial omniscience and infallibility, and he adds that he does not, can possibly have any confidence in the efficacy of what is proposed. Is a judge supposed to second-guess doctors? Will the judge make a decision on the basis of paperwork? Or will there be a hearing in open court?
How are the judges supposed to decide who is eligible for assisted dying and who's not? There are no objective signs that we can use to be sure about. They try to claim that coercion doesn't happen, but Diane came prepared with a rebuttal. Starmer might be confident in this bill, but many ministers of his own party are siding with Diane as they don't want to have a guilty conscience. The reality is, these judges are bound to make mistakes, and the potential implications of it are huge.
Robust safeguards for the sick and dying are absolutely vital to protect them from predatory relatives, to protect them from the state, but above all, to protect them from themselves. There will be those who say to themselves they don't want to be a burden.
Nobody wants to be a burden on their loved ones, and that leads to drastic actions. Given the state of the NHS, which Starmer should focus on fixing instead of helping people die, people are much more likely to resort to these measures. It doesn't end there. If the bill passes, it leaves room for more amendments down the line. Diane is standing up for the British public by trying to save them from this government, and Starmer sees that as an attack. This isn't the first time he has felt threatened by her. Just a few months ago, he tried to get rid of her. He failed, and now she might just take over.
We are told that there is no evidence of coercion in jurisdictions where assisted suicide is possible. But people do not generally write letters to sick relatives urging them to consider assisted suicide and then put the letter on file. And coercion in the family context can be about not what you say, but about what you don't say.
Diane understands more about the people of Britain than Starmer ever could. Coercion goes way deeper than just saying certain things to patients, as Diane pointed out. She's absolutely right, and none of the Labour ministers had an answer for it. They know that she's right, and by the looks of things, they might end up joining her over Starmer.
People keep saying that this bill can't be amended. Of course, any future government could bring in new clauses. And we can see what happened in Canada, which introduced assisted dying in 2016 for adults with terminal illnesses. In 2021, it was extended to people with no terminal illness and the disabled. And in March 2027, anyone with a serious mental health problem will also be eligible.
Canada is a prime example, and it shows that Diane has done her homework, much better than Starmer, who struggles to answer simple questions. The Canadians passed the same bill, and it got significantly worse as the years went by. Is Britain headed in the same direction? Life is supposed to be sacred, and now we're debating ways to assist dying. The worst part is that you can't really blame the people either. Labour has made life unlivable for many of them.
If this bill passes, we will have the NHS as a fully funded 100% suicide service, but palliative care will only be funded at 30% at best. The former member for Dunfermline East, Gordon Brown, has said recently, we need to show we can do better at assisted living.
Isn't the NHS already a suicide service? It's practically impossible to get proper care through it, but this bill will only make it official. Since the waiting lists are endless, people will just start opting for assisted dying to escape their misery. Diane makes a clear declaration that Starmer and his gang did not like. Is she mocking them for failing to get rid of her in the past? Either way, she's doing a phenomenal job at making a fool out of him.
I represent very many vulnerable people in marginalised communities. I cannot vote for a bill where I have doubts about whether they will be protected. We can come back, we can have a commission, we can craft a better bill, but I will not be voting for this bill this morning.
You might not agree with her, but you have to respect her conviction. Diane Abbott stands for something unlike Starmer and is prepared to properly defend her views. She's not afraid to stand up to Starmer and straight up refuse to vote on the bill. She goes further to completely expose Starmer over how he has been treating her. It's as if Starmer is doing everything he can to punish those who disagree with him.
I'm a bit worried about the cutting of the winter fuel allowance. And one of the things that's difficult about it, I think particularly for newer colleagues, people don't vote Labour only for a few weeks later. People, the Labour Party take money off pensioners. And I only hope that this is kind of an aberration and we aren't going to see further cuts in welfare. Because that would be very difficult for us as MPs and extraordinarily painful for people that voted for us.
It is laughable how Starmer has completely betrayed what the Labour Party stood for, and Diane isn't very happy about it. That could explain why she might be plotting against Starmer behind the scenes. Safe to say that neither the pensioners nor her saw this coming. It really took everyone by surprise when Starmer started revealing his true plans. Is Diane naive to hope that Starmer won't continue to make everyone's life miserable?
And they have said they had no choice but to cut this payment to pensioners.
Well, first of all, my view is that everything you needed to know about the state of the finances was in the public domain, and the rest of it could be guessed at. And this idea they had no choice, politics is about choosing, and there were other ways to raise that money. And raising it by taking the money off pensioners is, I don't think, not very good.
How embarrassing it must be for Starmer and Rachel Reeves that their number one excuse is being debunked by their own party member. Is she even wrong? The public finances are perfectly transparent and Labour knew all about it. Even if things were bad, they did make the choice to axe the pensioners to save some money. All of this could have been avoided, and make no mistake, Starmer chose to do this. Just like he tried to get rid of Diane before the elections because he was scared of her. You wouldn't believe how horrible he treated her after that.
How do you think you were treated by Keir Starmer and the Labour Party at that time?
I think initially I was treated as a non-person, which felt very strange because, well, at the same time, they were writing to party members trying to raise money on the back of how Hester had treated me without mentioning me, which was a bit odd.
What does this tell you about Starmer's true nature? A person who doesn't even care about his own party members can certainly not care for the British public. That explains why everything he has done seems to be so out of touch with reality. As always, this backfired horribly for him, and Starmer soon realized that he picked the wrong fight. Even after Diane was publicly receiving threats, Starmer and the rest of the Labour Party stayed silent.
That if somebody was threatening to have you shot, you would have felt that your party would have offered you more support, given you advice on safety and security, even kind of commiserated with you, and none of that happened.
And are you saying that the leader, Keir Starmer, treated you as a non-person?
As I recall, Keir Starmer treated me as a non-person.
In a time when Starmer could have shown some maturity and kindness, he decided to ignore Diane. No wonder she's being accused of plotting against him. Can you even blame her? Starmer has made a complete mess out of the Labour Party, and you might be wondering why he's doing all this. It's all due to Starmer's secret plan to turn the party upside down.
I think that Keir Starmer wanted to finish his clear out of the left in the Parliamentary Labour Party. And by writing a very ill-advised letter, I gave them the opportunity to move against me. And I think what they were trying to do was to string out the investigation. So when a general election was around the corner, they could just move me out of the way as a Labour candidate.
Diane was aiming to stand as a candidate during the elections, and Starmer saw her as a threat. He tried to stall the investigations to make sure she couldn't compete in the elections. Now that threat has multiplied as she's gaining more and more support. Sure, she has made mistakes in the past, but none of it compares to the huge blunders Starmer has made in just a few months of being in charge.
Why would they want to get rid of you?
Because I'm one of the last leading left-wingers in the Parliamentary Labour Party. And Keir Starmer's always saying, oh, it's a new Labour Party, it's new, you know. And how could you make it look more new than by getting rid of Diane Abbott?
Were you ever offered any kind of deal?
Indirectly, they offered me a deal through a third party, but I wasn't prepared to do a deal.
They tried their best to buy her off and get rid of her. Sadly for Starmer, not everyone can be bought the same way that he's been receiving gifts from liberal elites. Starmer's hidden agenda is to get rid of the old Labour Party and replace it with something much worse. Let's just say it's not working out well for him.
This is, of course, a climb down from Keir Starmer because Diane Abbott had been told that she'd been barred from standing in the general election as a Labour MP, and then she said actually, well, she was going to stand potentially as an independent because she was so angry about it. Now, just to remind...
When the elections were just around the corner, Diane wrote a rather offensive article and Starmer pounced on the opportunity. Labour's insecurity is pretty obvious as they tried to ban Diane from standing as a candidate in the elections. Starmer was the one who originally plotted against her. What he did was both clever and extremely vindictive at the same time. Oddly enough, a very unexpected person came to help Diane.
She immediately apologised for that and the offence that had been caused. Nevertheless, she had the Labour whip withdrawn from her. And because she had the Labour whip withdrawn, she sat in the House of Parliament, House of Commons, as an independent MP. And Keir Starmer, rather than dealing with this issue, let it run and run and run and run.
If Starmer wasn't so afraid of her, he wouldn't have stalled the investigations for so long. Starmer has never been confident, and it shows. Diane immediately apologized for the article, and there was no need to stall things for as long as they did. It was a clear plot to get rid of her, but she survived, and now she's back for revenge against Starmer and his new Labour Party.
Of course, we understand that people like Angela Rayner, the deputy leader, actually stepped in to back up Diane Abbott, saying that she thought that she should be able to stand in the general election as an MP. And of course, Diane Abbott represents a caucus on the left of the party who don't like Keir Starmer particularly, don't think he stands for what they believe in.
Angela Rayner, the troublemaker for Labour, out of all people came to Diane's rescue. Diane is not alone in her war against Starmer. Many people don't like Starmer and the number keeps growing. Labour is internally divided and the government is in complete chaos. The secret plot that Diane is accused of cooking up might just be the final straw that ends Starmer's leadership.
Or does it demonstrate the fact that Keir Starmer doesn't really have control over his party to the extent that Angela Rayner does?
So I think it represents that Keir Starmer has limits to his powers in terms of trying to purge the party of the left. And he's obviously picked a fight here which he has been unable to win.
How much power does Starmer have over the Labour Party? He was confident that he could purge the old members of the party, but that clearly hasn't worked out well for him. It's even more embarrassing when his deputy, Angela Rayner, goes behind his back and completely undermines his plans.
Let's point to that. Now, of course, I think the test for Keir Starmer is, can he now hold the line on people like Faisal Shaheen? Can he hold the line on people like Lloyd Russell Moyle down on the south coast? If he can't, James, and then he ends up caving in on those MPs, that's going to be a serious problem, because part of Keir Starmer's campaign is that he has changed the party.
Starmer was elected because he managed to fool everyone into believing that the Labour Party had been completely changed. Now, seeing the internal revolt, it seems that the Labour leadership is about to change very soon, especially since people are incredibly unhappy with the way things are going. Take, for example, the assisted dying bill that Diane Abbott opposed. More and more members of the parliament are joining her side and exposing huge flaws in it.
Yeah, I mean, we are disappointed that the vote's gone against us, but I think it's because the proposals has basically been all about choice and autonomy, and it is difficult to argue against that. And we're very concerned about the scrutiny that the bill's going to have. You know, there's been lots of reassurance that don't worry, if you've got concerns about it, will all be looked at in the committee stage.
The bad news is that the bill was passed. In fact, it passed with a huge majority. The good news is that many people are still opposing it. A good number of the parliament is disappointed by the results, but there's a very real chance that the bill might be thrown into the trash along with Starmer. Diane's supposed plotting might just work.
You're most concerned about, Mark?
Well, a number of things. The judges is one of them. So High Court judges has been something that's reassured a lot of people. Don't worry, the judges will be looking at it. But we currently have 19,000 hours of High Court judge sitting time in this country. And on a conservative estimate, just alone for this bill, it would take 34,000 hours of High Court judge time to manage this bill.
The High Court judges being involved was supposed to reassure us that nobody will be exploited, but the facts do not support this claim. There simply aren't enough judges to make this a viable safeguard. Our justice system is already overworked as it is, and there's no room for more workload. To make matters worse, Labour was caught lying about it in the Parliament, further humiliating themselves.
And if someone says, don't worry, we've got the strongest safeguards in the world, a High Court judge will look at it. Kim Leadbeater actually had to correct the record in Parliament today, because during the debate she said, I've discussed with the highest level of judiciary. Actually, she hadn't. The serving judiciary got back during the debate and said, no, you haven't. She had to go back and say, sorry, Mr. Speaker, that wasn't true. So that hasn't been thought through at the highest level.
How embarrassing it must be to lie in the Parliament and then be immediately exposed for it. How does Labour manage to make a fool out of themselves so often? That's not all. The problems and loopholes with this bill are endless, and the more you look into it, the more concerning it gets. If this bill is put into effect, countless vulnerable people will be put at risk, and that's not something Diane is going to allow. At least someone in the Labour Party has their morals intact.
I'm really concerned about people who are poor, elderly, vulnerable, perhaps disabled already, may not have English as a first language, may already not trust the healthcare system. There were some really eloquent speeches about Black and ethnic minority communities who already have trust problems with the health service for good reason often. and now suddenly they know that doctors could be actually suggesting that they might want to end their lives.
As always, it's the poor and marginalized people who will be affected the most by this. Starmer's government has been nothing but a grinder that keeps on making life worse for the working class Brits. Now, they're just simply trying to take their lives away as well, because taking their livelihoods away wasn't enough for Starmer.
What you will do now, what campaigners like you against this will do at this stage.
Well, certainly we'll be pushing for a much stronger, funding for palliative care. Lots of people have said that palliative care is so important. It's strange that campaigners for assisted dying have suddenly, discovered that we really need to fund palliative care better. They haven't really been saying much about that before now, so we'll continue to say.
There's hope that things will not escalate further, with accusations flying around that Diane is plotting against Starmer, and the fact that many Labour members are already against Starmer. The chances of seeing new leadership are very high. On top of all that, many members of Parliament are on the fence regarding this bill, so there's certainly hope. Do you think Diane is plotting? If so, will her plan be successful? Everyone has had enough of Starmer, and perhaps it's time to expose him. That's something you can help out by liking this video and subscribing to the channel.